Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wahine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with Wahine. Today I'm joined by two amazing women who are actually on the eve of their first Auckland show of Midnight Confessions. So I've got two people from the group, Abby Lyons and Alia Marshall. The show Midnight Confessions explores everything from fantasies and the age-old question of cutting a fringe to jealousy, playing pretend with your best friend for the last time and more. They say it's really important to us that we make honest theatre. We want to open the door to the lives of women and non-binary characters outside of the male gaze, says Abby. Midnight Confessions feels like a Jacqueline Wilson novel, like The Babysitter's Club, which is a 2000s Disney original, and Fleabag, all jam-packed into one. That was a review from Salient magazine back in 2022 when they first performed this play. Uniquely, this production was created through a non-hierarchical working system with the four company members, Abby Lyons, Anna Barker, Alia Marshall, and Maya Odes, sharing the roles of director, writers, and performers. They had an abundance of ideas, skills, and roles that they were interested in, but the same goal for the production, so they decided to all share the key roles. This collaborative process is effectively shown in Midnight Confessions with endearing performances and beautiful writing that represent female relationships honestly at their strongest and most vulnerable. They say that the show is a love letter to the friendships that shaped them growing up, and that was said by Maya Odes. Described as an entertaining, funny, moving piece of theatre, which was a review by Theatre View back in 2022, and refreshing and empowering. Midnight Confessions is an experimental anthology piece about love, loss, and the power of female friendships, which was inspired by the classic play Love and Information by Carol Churchill. This piece is set in the intimate setting of a sleepover, which I'm sure we can all relate to. Welcome, Abby and Alia. How are you?
Kia ora.
Hi, good, thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, we've just come off of our tech and dress, so we were on stage like 5 minutes ago, and then we ran here to interview.
Nice. So on that note, actually, it's the night before your first Auckland show. So how are you feeling about that? Are you prepared?
Yeah, we're feeling very excited. I think there's definitely some nerves. It's the company's first performance in outside of Wellington, where we're based. So that's definitely got some weight to it. We're performing at the Basement in the central area of Auckland, and it's been so much fun. It's starting to feel very real, but yeah, we're all really excited.
Yeah, we drove up on the Friday and kind of stopped in Hamilton and then came to Auckland on Saturday. So it's felt a little bit like a girls' road trip until we got to Basement. Like, oh, we're actually doing a show.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of,
like, we're here now.
It's kind of settling in that like, oh, this is real. This is happening, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it's really cool. Cool that you're able to take the show to Auckland and expand it out of Wellington as well. It clearly shows how successful the show was the first time 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about both of your journeys into the acting and theatre world and what inspired you to get into theatre.
Yeah. I think like many young wahine growing up, I started in dance. I started in dance and ballet and was truthfully pretty terrible at it. I was always the kid that fell over. I just like wasn't very good at dance, but I really loved using my face. And so pretty quickly I switched from dance to drama, and yeah, I just really enjoyed theatre, really enjoyed acting, and I grew up in the south of Auckland and could have gone to Auckland for university, but really wanted to explore a new city. So I moved to Wellington and did a Bachelor of Arts at Vic and in film and theatre. And just kind of since then, I've been doing a lot of acting. Another one of my key kind of strands is producing and production management, which I also found a lot of joy for, especially at my time at uni. But yeah, and that's where I met all these lovely people to make, Heartbreaker Productions. So,
yeah. My journey's a little different. I didn't start doing theatre until I was 15. So I'd kind of tried out sports and all sorts of other like extracurriculars and never quite felt like they fit. And when I first saw my first professional production, it kind of clicked that I was like, oh, this is it. This is where I want to be. So yeah, got into musical theatre like many people do. I'm originally from Tauranga, so shout out Tauranga Musical Theatre. But yeah, and I, similar to Abby, I moved to Wellington to get my Bachelor of Arts at Te Herenga Waka. Formed the company in third year on the floor of Studio 77. And yeah, I clearly could not get enough of study because I'm doing my PhD in theatre at the moment.
Oh, wow. PhD.
Yeah, pretty huge.
So that must be time consuming, like on top of theatre and, putting all these plays on. How do you manage the PhD alongside all of this?
Yeah, it's been an interesting adjustment because I kind of treat the PhD like a full-time job. So it's been, yeah, kind of finding that balance between writing about theatre and then doing theatre. But I won't lie, I'm definitely excited to get home and rest for a bit. But no, I feel really lucky to be able to study and talk about the thing that I love the most and do it with my best buds.
Yeah, that's really cool. So what theatre work have you both done up till now? Like what other plays have you put on or what other productions have you been a part of?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the company, Heartbreaker Productions, this is our third production. We formed the company to do a script by Mia in 2021, I believe it was, at Fringe Festival, which was called The Conversations with the Ghost in My Bedroom, which was then later nominated for the Before 25 playwright competition, or finalist rather. So we started with that production, which had Mia and Anna performing in it, and then we jumped on as extra collaborators. Alia directed, and I was sort of producing, stage managing in the background. And then our second production was for Alia's Masters in Fine Arts called Trifles, which is an adaptation of a play, and I cannot remember the name of the play, if you want to tell me.
It is called Trifles. Same
called
name.
Trifles. The clue was there all along. But yeah, and so that was an adaptation, and we worked on that, mostly the two of us, and then we decided to all come together and kind of make our own thing as a group. So that's kind of like the history of the company. In terms of myself, I've done a real mix of things. I've worked a bit with Red Scare Theatre. I'm working with them at the moment on their upcoming play, Before We Slip Beneath the Sea, which is really exciting. It's an immersive and concurrent show, which is very cool and very challenging. I've just recently come off a production at Circa where I was an understudy. It's all kind of varied, lots and lots of different pieces here and there, as I'm sure many artists will relate to. Yeah.
Yeah, my experience has been quite interesting as well. I started off as exclusively a performer, and I realized as I got further into uni, I really like directing. So yeah, I directed Conversations, and then I wrote and directed Trifles for my masters. Yeah, what have I done this year? I directed Jack Darling's Amuse, which was their Comedy Fest show. They were nominated for Best Upcoming Newcomer. I cannot remember the name of the award, but they were nominated. And yeah, I've done spots of directing. I took a year off last year, but I'm slowly reintroducing myself. Yeah, I mostly perform, write, and direct, but I love designing sound. So when you come to the show and you hear the sounds going on, I put those together. But yeah, I feel like, as Abby said, like many artists, we kind of all have our fingers in many pies when we work on things to kind of be jacks of all trades, for lack of a better term. Totally. But yeah, I also worked on the script reading for Tui Girls a couple of months back. Yeah, so I do a lot more directing, but I'm very much missing being on the stage. So I think I will be starting to get back out there this year.
That's very cool. Yeah, it's so cool to hear like how you're both really well-rounded. You're not just actors or you're not just directors, but you do a little bit of everything, which is only ever going to help you in the future to understand it all so much more, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's definitely very much part of like the Wellington theatre community specifically, that a lot of people within that community tend to wear a lot of hats and tend to be able to do a lot of different roles, and we're all very much collaborators rather than like individual like roles as such. So yeah, I think that's a really lovely part of the Wellington theatre community, especially.
I agree.
Nice. So on to Midnight Confessions. I think we all definitely remember the fun of sleepovers with friends as we were kids. It was probably for a lot of people the highlight of being a kid, because eventually the sleepovers stop as you get older. What made you want to write a play depicting those fun and also like deep and meaningful times?
I think it kind of initially it started off as a little bit of a joke where we were like, wouldn't it be cool to do a show in a fort and like have the audience come into the fort with us? And then the more we talked about it, the more we thought, oh, there's actually something here, and this is really exciting to all of us.
Yeah, I think a key part is it provides a really interesting world and sort of playground for theatre. Another, or like for the show itself, another key part of Midnight Confessions is it's an anthology. So rather than a linear narrative, it's lots of small scenes. And so to kind of tie it all together, we were like, we should have one sort of consistent factor. And for us, that was the fact that they're all set at a sleepover and all kind of different experiences and scenarios that you might see or might have experienced at a sleepover. So it was a really great kind of creative limitation where we had this whole world to play in, but we also set almost some rules, which really helped us build it and write it and create it all together. And yeah, we just thought it would be really fun. I also remember when I was a teenager, I saw a show in the basement where I think it was called Flaps Retouched. And it was introverse, and we were sitting on mattresses or like couches to watch the show. And I remember thinking that that was so joyful and fun. And like, there was a level of that I was like, oh, like this feels very intimate and sleepovery and feminine and fun. And I think I definitely was inspired by that production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like we started to create these little scenes. Some of them are devised, some of them are written. And yeah, we sort of realized that sleepovers are wonderful. We really love them. But the more we talk to our friends about their own experiences, we kind of realize like there are really difficult parts to sleepovers, and we wanted to acknowledge that friendship is really hard, and you know, growing up as a young wahine, being socialized as a woman is comes with all sorts of drawbacks. But yeah, so I think it comes back to that idea of wanting to tell a really honest story and like celebrating the heartwarming bits, but also, you know, sitting in the uncomfortable, heartbreaking bits to acknowledge that it was all, you know, it wasn't all good and it wasn't all bad, but it really shaped us.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. So is the play based on sleepovers that you both had, or is it fictionalized?
It's definitely a mix. So because all four of us wrote it, like all four of us come from different places of inspiration. So there's a varying level of, oh yeah, I heavily relate to this scene and like is kind of inspired by our own sleepovers. And then there are some that are super fictionalized. So it's definitely a mix. We have also, as the four of us, since becoming friends and writing the show, had sleepovers. So like that's also like a nice level of like, yeah, we've all had sleepovers together, and there's like that added kind of experience and joy. But yeah, it's definitely a mix of sort of real and made up.
Yeah, I think we started off, rather than starting with a script and, you know, getting on our feet, we just did a lot of talking and a lot of bonding over what your sleepovers like. Oh, mine were like this. And I think my favorite part about the show is, you know, performing it is obviously first. But I love when people come up to us afterwards and they're like, this show reminded me of this one very specific sleepover memory, and it just makes me so happy to be like, I love that you're all thinking about your friends while you're watching this show.
There are a couple of people that told us after our 2022 season that they wanted to go home and call their best friend. And that was like a huge highlight for me of like, yeah, they're so universal. Like, yeah, there's such a universal experience, I think. So
Yeah, and I think that the mixture of fictionalized stories and truthful stories feels like a nice marriage of the two, where we're not actively exploring, you know, the whole theater's not therapy thing. Like we're taking little bits from our own lives and then sprinkling in little bits of fiction as well to kind of, I don't know, exaggerate it.
totally.
Very cool. So you've performed this play back in 2022 in Wellington, and it got really good reviews, hence why you're performing it again now and why you've taken it to Auckland. Have you changed anything in the play this time around, or is it exactly the way it was 2 years ago?
I would say it's tighter. There is one scene that we've completely changed, that we just felt like wasn't quite working in the context of the rest of the show. So that scene has now completely changed, and then the rest of it has just sort of been sharpened and edited. But yeah, it's definitely changed a bit.
Yeah, and I think that the reviews definitely like showed us the areas where we wanted to improve and kind of wanted to really tighten the story. So when we were offered this season at Basement, we sat down and thought about what was working, what wasn't, and how can we. Our very first rehearsal wasn't actually getting on our feet. We sat in a room, we had a whiteboard, and we went through essentially all of our ideas and like what we wanted to say. And we didn't necessarily go back to that whiteboard, but we sat down and thought about, you know, what were we trying to say in the beginning? Are we still doing that? And also just kind of freshening up some things. We realized a little while ago, like, it's been 2 years and we've grown up quite a bit since then as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like we've grown quite a bit in those 2 years. So there was definitely a bit of a refresh. And it was we advertised it very much as like an experimental anthology. And it definitely was that. We were really excited by it, but we really had no idea if people would love it or find it weird or if they would relate to it or not. So getting that feedback was really, really helpful and really helped us further develop it, I would say. So.
That's really good. Did you ever get any reviews 2 years ago that made you think that you need to do it better, or were there like any reviews that weren't as good as you thought they would be?
I think we had very grateful. We had very good reviews. I think there was like
pretty lucky.
A comment or two in one of them where it was like, there's moments where it doesn't quite feel like you're all united. And that's the best part of the show, is that we're this little cohesive organism. That we took that and thought about like, okay, how can we, you know, still do what we're trying to do, but still make it feel like we're coming together at the end.
Totally. Yeah. There was like the scene that we changed, for example, was sort of the main scene where there was huge conflict between characters. And it was also around quite difficult subject matter. And so we were really intrigued by the feedback on that. And that was kind of the one chunk of feedback that I remember that was it wasn't super critical at all, but it was like, oh, this didn't land for me. And that was really great to go, okay, great. It's not landing for people. We are also finding it a bit tricky. Need to go back to the drawing board with that one. But we were really grateful and really lucky to have a lot of really, really positive reviews, which was awesome.
Yeah. That's really good. And as you mentioned before, you all share the roles of acting, directing, producing, and writing, and plus, I'm sure, much more. Like it's, you know, there's no hierarchy to your team. So what are the benefits and the challenges of working this way?
I think some benefits are the fact that there's 4 brains in a room, so there's lots of shared ideas and there's lots to bounce off each other. And we all have very different skill sets, but similar interests, and there are lots of roles that multiple people were interested in. And so like that's a huge benefit of it. But then a huge con of that obviously is that there are 4 brains in the room, and so a lot of decisions have to be made, are made together. And I remember when we were first putting the script together, we had an abundance of ideas, and then we started running it and went, oh no, this is far too long. And the order was really weird that we put the scenes in. So we had to do a lot of chopping and changing. And editing, which can be hard for any writer to fully pull scenes out. And so that's definitely a challenge to trust your co-workers and maybe kind of like let go of some things. But that's also a really great benefit is that I know I have a huge amount of trust in the other three creators, and I trust that they're not going to let me go on stage with something that's not ready. So yeah, it's kind of a mix. Everything that is a benefit is also maybe a con. I don't know if you want to add.
No, I agree. I think it feels really nice to kind of be in a room with a group of people where we're all on the same playing field, we're all on the same page, and there's we're very passionate about all of our voices being heard. And like, if someone's got an idea, we'll try it and we'll see how it goes. But in saying that, again, it's really hard. I remember very specifically the rehearsal where we looked at, God, I think we had like 15 or 20 scenes or something like that. And we had to sit down and go, right.
We needed like 10 or something. So, it was like we had to cut a bunch.
Yeah, and it was a hard rehearsal of killing our darlings, but at the end of it, we left and we were like, I feel surprisingly okay. Like I thought I'd feel really upset, but I actually feel like this is, I think it's that sense of a collective goal where even though, it sucks to have one of your scenes pulled, it's also really nice to acknowledge that, yes, it's not going to be here now. It could be somewhere later, but the show will be so much better for it.
We kind of had the same artistic vision and kind of mission statement. Again, like Alia was saying, at that very first rehearsal where we had this big whiteboard and kind of were like, what do we want to say? And so when we kind of lost track of going, oh, but I really like this one scene, we were just like, well, let's come back to the statement. What says this the best? And I think that really helped us. And just like sharing the work and we're really clear about who takes on what. So whilst we are all sharing the roles, we're very clear of Alia is in charge of this and Abby is in charge of this. And we kind of built a system. If I wrote a scene, I would give it for feedback to everybody. Everyone would give me any comments or things they thought they needed that maybe needed work. I would take on that feedback, but ultimately it's my choice as the writer. And then we weren't allowed to really direct the scenes we wrote, just to, again, and really add to this collaborative space. So yeah, that's kind of how we kind of set these rules of like our stages, I guess, of the different developments.
Yeah, lots of trial and error doing it as well.
Lots of trial and error.
So what do you do if, like in that example where you had to cut almost half your scenes, what do you do if one of you, say for example, really wants to keep that scene, but the other three think that should be one of the ones that you should get rid of? Like, how do you get through, if you have disagreements, how do you get through that and, without hating each other or without, cutting your friendship?
It's difficult. I think it's a hard line to balance.
You go.
But yeah, I think it's, at least for me, I feel, even though it kind of hurts sometimes when like your scene isn't chosen or like you really want to do it and everyone else is like, sorry, buddy, that's not going to work. I think it's the sense of safety of knowing that even though you feel really stink that your scene's not going to be on, the girls understand and we're all in the same boat. And
and I think again we would just like come back to the mission statement and in a scenario where it's sort of 3-on-1, there is a bit of a majority rules, like or we try and come to a compromise point of okay, so what parts of the scene do you really love? Is there specific lines, or is it the themes, or is it the exact relationships? And maybe we can mold that in elsewhere. We all, for example, wrote a confession each, which we all wrote ourselves and we all perform ourselves. And when we first wrote them, they were all way too long. And we also put them all together, whereas now they're split throughout the play. And we were wondering, okay, well, do we cut full monologues or what do we do? And we decided, okay, everyone go away and write a very short version of yours. And that ended up working because we were going, oh, well, this one is very sleepovery and this one maybe isn't. But instead of kind of picking and choosing, we were like, let's go go away and we'll all write shorter versions and things like that.
Yeah, and I think a really big part as well is like from the very get-go, we've all been very clear that like just because your work isn't in there or because you're not on stage or whatever, it's not because of you.
No, yeah.
And it's like we always come back to that kaupapa of like this is a collective goal.
Yeah, it's about the goals. It's
Yeah.
not about you. It's about whether it's ready and whether it fits the goal.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a key takeaway, even, you know, when people get into business together, or if you're doing, you know, starting up a business with a family member or a friend, like you just have to have that level of trust there where you can be honest with each other, but you're not going to let each other down when it comes to it. And yeah, otherwise it's not going to work, is it? If you're going to take everything personally, or if one of you's going to walk out because you're annoyed at something.
Yeah.
And like in the context of, you know, businesses, you see that happening in businesses all the time where like one person has let all the others down and, you know, then the whole thing falls apart. So it's good to say that, you know, you've got your underlying friendship, which is the basis of this trust, which I think is so important, especially when it's, you know, women. Like you need to all be there for each other and, you know, pull each other up. And yeah, very cool to see. So obviously, you know, COVID happened a few years ago, and things like theatre was one of the first things that, you know, not essential, so it wasn't happening. How did COVID affect your work? Like, were either of you doing any plays at the time that had to get postponed, or did you have to shift anything to online? Because that was the time where lots of plays and stuff were done online, which is just like unheard of in the past. Yeah, how did you two get through those times?
So we were in our third year of uni, and we had got the company course, which is essentially a course where you put on a show. So you got 12 weeks to put on a show. We did our first 2 weeks in person, and then COVID died. So our professor and all of us were like, what do we do?
Yeah.
So we did an online performance.
Yeah. Which was so interesting. Yeah. I think it was totally, like you said, like all these shows were popping up online, and there was a collective sense of, we don't really know what we're doing and we don't know how this is going to work, but we'll just give it a go because we want to keep making theatre. So it was definitely such a trial and error production. And I think there were some things that really worked, and there were definitely some things that really didn't, but it was a huge learning experience. And yeah, so we made an online show that kind of played on a full website, and there were sections of the website where you could do a tour of the set, like a virtual tour. Cool. And so we started reverting to like, what kind of theatre techniques can we use without being in a theatre? So for example, our editing style was a big thing. We did a lot of specific characters wore different colours to kind of really hit that like, another like visual thing that we could use to our advantage. It was very interesting. But yeah, so for us, it was mostly the fact that we had to move our whole final year of production online of university.
And I think to add as well, like COVID is unfortunately still here, and I think it's been really rough. You know, not only a lot of our friends are getting sick, a lot of our friends are getting shows cancelled. And yeah, I think it really felt like going back into the theatre was a lot harder to get back into it because it was so, you know, stop-starty. But yeah, I'm really grateful that we still got to make stuff, and Conversations was, I think, born out of that need to put something on stage, because we're all like, we haven't done it in so long, we just want to make something. Yeah,
and like theatre is such an intimate experience, and it's such, obviously it's live, and so it's so person to person, and so that was definitely an aspect that we missed when we were doing our online production. And again, like, we really drove us to do more, as we were like, we're really craving that, like, that live reaction of like, you're performing and the people are right there and you're feeling their energy and you're hearing their laughter and all of the things that are feeding back at you. Like that live response is so wonderful and such a key part of it.
Yeah.
So
I know, like, during, I think it was like in 2021, I watched this play once where they made it like an interactive play, and they got all the audience involved, and it was really interesting and like odd at the same time, but it was quite cool. So it was like they knew that the audience was engaged, like you weren't just, your laptop was there but you weren't actually watching type of thing, because every now and then they'd ask like a different person in the audience to like contribute. And it was interesting. And it was just cool to see like how during COVID all different theatre companies were just coming up with different ways of doing things without putting all their productions on hold. And there was another a comedian who did a show where he had all his audience like up on the screen, all like little boxes, so they could see everyone else that was in the show. Because I think another thing is on the audience perspective, like when you go to a show, if the whole audience is full, you like to know, oh yeah, there's lots of people at the show. But if you're watching it online, you don't really know how many other people are watching it as well, and it's quite isolating for the performers and the audience. So this comedian, he's quite famous, but he did this really cool thing where like just everyone was up in tiny boxes, so you could see everyone else that was there. And then at certain points of the show, like how comedians normally pick on the people in the first few rows, he'd pick on like random people in his screen and just get them to pitch into a show. And that was like a really cool thing that he did as well. It was like, oh, you would have never seen this before COVID times. Yeah. So what do you both enjoy the most and least about theatre? Is there anything you wish you could change, or do you like everything the way it is?
Such a good question.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing would be give us more money. It is really frustrating being an artist and being told, oh, you need to get a real job. And it's like, this is a real job. We just don't get the payment we deserve. And I think that, there's kind of some ideas and some ways of doing things that people hang on to, particularly, quite strict hierarchies. Like that's a me thing. I'm excited to see what more collaborative theatre will look like. But in saying that, theatre it's the place where you belong. It doesn't matter who you are, you belong there. I think for me that was a really important thing growing up. Was like I was a little freaky kid, and I went to the theatre and I met a bunch of other freaky kids, and it's such a home for so many people, and I really value that.
I just love it. I love how just love the like live experience of it. Like people will always go and like experience different things with different shows. And it's just like this wonderful world of creation. I think something that is maybe my least favorite, or just like something I would be interested in, like, oh, how could we change that, is theater. Like once the show is done, the like weight of it it's just kind of like lifted. For example, like you spend so long in the season and like leading up to the season, like sourcing props, building your set, and those things are so precious during your season because you need them. And then as soon as the show is done, they like lose all meaning because the show isn't there anymore. And so then the show lives in this like liminal space and experience for the people who saw it will remember it, and they experienced it, but like it won't happen again. I don't know how to explain it. It's just this weird like
it's ephemeral.
It's just that's something I always find really odd when you finish a season and you're like, these props that if I lost them I would have been so stressed about are no longer something that I'm that stressed about.
And I guess like that's exactly it, right? Because there's no like actual finished product, or I guess like your props, the most you can do is if you do the show again, you give them you use them again, or you donate them to another theatre group that might need them for their show. The other thing with theatre, and we've interviewed like a couple of like fringe festival performers and comedy festival performers and stuff. Some people have said that especially in New Zealand, they end up having to do a lot of the advertising and promotional work and all of that for their shows, because especially in New Zealand, the whole theatre and comedy scene is not, it's not a huge scene. So a lot of the time you end up having to do everything yourself. You don't really have a company that you can just outsource all the marketing to and all of that. Do you guys notice that have you had to do that as well? Or is there someone that takes care of the ticketing and everything that you put up on the website?
Your venues tend to obviously look after you. Like we've been really looked after by Basement and Bats, who, they host all the ticketing and things like that. But in terms of like bringing people in to see the show, that's definitely down to the company themselves or the artists themselves. So yeah, so it's definitely tricky, and it's definitely, you end up doing, again, like multiple roles, and yeah, that definitely takes up a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, all of the marketing that you see on our Instagram came from a rehearsal where we all sat down with lots of glue and scissors, and we made it all out of collages because we were like, we don't have the money to hire someone.
We're doing it ourselves.
And I think, it's similar to the working system. There's so many benefits and there's so many challenges. So it's been quite an interesting, especially doing a tour. There's been so much to balance and so much additional mahi that we weren't anticipating. But in saying that, Basement have been so wonderful. And Bats, as always, they're going to be wonderful.
Our venues have really looked after us. So that's definitely like, you do a lot of work to bring people in to see the show, but you're also really supported by your venues. So.
That's good to hear. Have you ever noticed a difference between how men and women are treated in this industry, or is it quite equal?
I think I have noticed rather that it's very different.
Yeah, I'll say, I think as wahine and as femmes, we are expected to be perfect and to know everything. And sometimes I find that men don't have those expectations. So it sometimes feels like we're fighting for recognition and fighting to be seen as, the talented people we are. But sometimes it kind of feels like, I don't know, because of who we are, we have to do that extra amount of work. And it's like, I'm not just a performer, I also do this and this, because it's like, to be a woman in the industry is to, I think, be expected to be
above and beyond, and rather than like just good, you have to be like incredible at all the things. And I think also a lot of, I mean, the reason we wanted to write this play is because we wanted to write, and like kind of the co-papa of our whole company is we want to write about relationships and characters between women and femme people that don't involve men. So many characters and plays so many female characters or women and, femme characters are written with the involvement of men, whether that's like the male gaze or like their relationships on stage, and kind of, there are always men factored in. And we sort of went, nah, we want to write about relationships and stories that don't involve men. So that was a key part of Midnight Confessions, especially, is because we were like, let's make room for women's stories on stage.
Yeah, and I think like in most industries, there's often a difference between the way men and women are treated. But I think it's been really nice to. I don't remember where I read it or saw it, but it was a really interesting quote about how women, when they're writing men, we do lots of research in order to tell their stories truthfully, because we're not men, we don't know what they experience. A lot of men, they're like, I've talked to a woman, I've got a mom, I could write.
I know all of it.
It's frustrating watching shows where I'm like, this woman was written by a man, and I can tell.
That's the thing, right? It's really obvious when it is, because women that are watching the show are like, no, that's not what women go through. That's not what we think when that happens.
And another part of writing Midnight Confessions is we were really interested in writing women to be different to each other. I think a lot of the time, even if you write stories about lots of women, a lot of the times those women are kind of lumped together, of like they have similar feelings and similar reactions and things like that. And there are lots of examples in our show of one catalyst in one scene and like 4 extremely different reactions and things, because women are all different. Like, we're all individuals and people, so we don't all react the same and feel the same and think the same, because
very true. Have you ever had anyone, because since all of you are women in your team, have you ever had any negative feedback on that? Like, have you ever had anyone call you feminists, or, oh, there's no men involved in that, and how people, especially guys, would go and insult that type of thing? Have you ever had to deal with that?
I think from the get-go, we were very much like, no boys allowed. Like, we don't care what men think about us or our production.
It was very like, no boys allowed. But then it turned into, oh no, just we will choose to put if there is a space for a woman or a non-binary person to be involved, we'll give them the role first. But like, it's not like we don't work with men. We do work with men. It's just we want to create theatre for, by, and with women. So it's like they're kind of our first range. But there are definitely men that help us, and you know.
And if there's anyone who does think less of us because we're feminists, they haven't told us, which is probably a good sign.
Yeah, because we haven't had any bad feedback. Thank goodness.
That's good. And is there much of a theatre community in Wellington? And how does the Wellington theatre scene compare to other parts of New Zealand, like Auckland, and other parts of the world? If you've performed in other parts of the world, or if you have an idea how they work.
I think there's definitely a really nice community in Wellington. I think especially having the Fringe Festival there's a real hub of creators and people who are putting things on for the first time and learning and creating new things. There's also a really lovely community theatre space there. I've done quite a few shows with Stagecraft, who are a community theatre company in Wellington, and like they're a lot of fun. So I think there is a really nice community. I think Alia and I were lucky enough to go to PANS earlier this year, which is like a networking event for artists everywhere, and that's actually how we sort of met more people in Auckland. So like that was also really nice, and I think I had like from that experience I got the vibe that Aucklanders, a lot of them were maybe more connected than Wellingtons are, but that was just from one experience, so I don't really know.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I really value about our experiences. Like we studied at Vic, we were kind of doing some theatre outside of uni, but as soon as we left, our professors and alumni around us were all so encouraging. Of like, go and make something. It could be really bad, but at least you tried. And there was that, it's a really beautiful place to like, you make a work, it's, even if it's a development or a professional piece, and people will treat you with so much aroha because they understand that like art is really personal, it's our baby. And like a lot of the mentors we've had have been so incredible. So I think that our community, I feel really grateful to be a part of.
I think a key part of the community, sort of jumping off what you said, Alia, is around learning and helping each other. With this show in particular, we had a showing really early on with a lot of Wellington creatives that we trusted and really appreciated the judgment from. And a lot of their input from like the show was incredibly different before that showing and after that showing, and their feedback and just support really helped us learn these are the bits that are working, these are the bits that aren't. We really lean on a lot of our mentors and stuff. So there's definitely a real community, like a collaborative and learning-based community, I would say.
100%.
Nice, that's good to hear. And I think there's also like a real, from what I've heard of other performers that we've interviewed, there's a real like woman supporting woman network within the comedy, acting, theatre scene where, like if someone knows or something, they'll tell other women that, oh, you might be keen to get involved in this, or they'll put people's names forward rather than being gatekeepers.
Oh, absolutely. Women supporting women so much so in the theatre community.
That's really cool. And now where to from here for the next 5 years in the foreseeable future? Have you guys thought that far ahead?
We haven't.
I feel like yes and no.
Yes and no. I feel like we've been so like wrapped up in doing the tour that we're kind of just sprinting to the finish line. But I feel like we have some pretty lofty and big goals. Especially if this tour goes really well, we would love to do more tours.
We're very keen to do school touring as well, has been a goal of ours for quite a while. And kind of putting on productions that students can come and write about for their like NCEA and things like that. So I think touring is definitely in the future, whether it be this show or a new show. A couple of our company members have written some new scripts that maybe will be developed in the future. But I think ultimately we just want to keep making theatre that we're really proud of and, telling stories that we love. So that's the main goal.
Playing silly buggers with our friends. Sillies. It truly feels like we go to a rehearsal, we be silly with our friends, and then we go home.
It's
like, oh, we're also doing like actual work.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Delightful.
for the next 5 years, I think it's making bigger and better works.
I was gonna say, and Alia will be doing their PhD.
I'm doing a PhD, so I will
Yes.
be finishing that
We'll be
in
finishing that.
2026. And I'm hoping to become a professor so I can yap about theatre and then do theatre. Yeah, and I feel like it's always very strange to think about the 5-year goal because I'm like, oh God, I hadn't thought that far.
Yeah. Now, if people want to find out more about the show, how can they follow you on socials, and how can they buy tickets, and tell our audience what dates and where you're performing?
So we are mostly we're on Instagram and Facebook as Heartbreaker Productions NZ. Our Auckland season opens tomorrow on the 20th of August and runs till the 24th. You can get tickets at iTicket or the Basement Theatre website. They start at like $18. And then we very quickly travel back to Wellington. And our Wellington season is from the 28th to the 31st of August. So 4 days in Wellington. And you can get tickets on the BATS website. But yeah, give us a follow on Instagram. I think we've also started a TikTok, actually, now I think about it.
We have indeed.
Yes, so you can also
traction.
you can also follow us on TikTok. Yeah, that's where you can find us.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wish you all the best for your show. Less than 24 hours until your first show. So I hope the Auckland run goes really well. And just thank you so much for taking out the time to chat to me. And I'm looking forward to watching it next week when you come down to Wellington, and can't wait to see what you get up to next.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
having us. We really appreciate it.